Before we proceed, I'd like to inform the committee on a matter of membership that following notification from the relevant group leader, Councillor Bob Lawton has replaced Councillor Drew Meller as a member of the Planning Committee. So welcome to you, Councillor Lawton. I will now ask each
Councillor Ball, thank you.
I will now ask each person participating in this meeting to state their name and role. I am Councillor Simon Bull and I am Chairman. Councillor Simon McCormack.
Councillor Simon McCormack, Committee Member and Vice Chair.
Councillor Stephen Barron.
Councillor Steve Barron, Councillor for Parkstone Ward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stephen Bartlett.
Councillor Steve Bartlett for Redhill and Northbourne Ward.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
Councillor Malcolm Davies, Councillor for South Bourne East.
We seem to be getting some feedback on that. I don't know if someone can help with that. Councillor Beverley Dunlop.
Councillor Beverley Dunlop, Moordown Ward.
Councillor Peter Hall.
Councillor Peter Hall, Christchurch Ward.
Councillor Hilliard.
Paul Hilliard, Councillor for Muddyford, Stampit and West Highcliffe Ward.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Toby Johnson, Ward Councillor for Alderney and Bourne Valley.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, Councillor Kelsey, Eastcliff and Springbourne Ward.
Councillor Le Poitevin.
Marion Le Pedvin, Councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands.
Councillor Lawton.
Councillor Bob Lawton, Councillor for West Southbourne.
Councillor O'Neill.
Councillor Tony O'Neill for Penhill Ward.
Councillor Stribley.
Anne Stribley, Parkstone Ward Councillor.
And Councillor Trent.
Yep. Councillor Tony Trent, Councillor for Alderney and Bourne Valley Ward.
Thank you, councillors. Moving on to officers. Mr. Gould.
Simon Gould, Development Management Manager.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Doug Evans, Development Management Team Leader.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Chair. David Hodges, also Development Management Team Leader.
Mrs. Barrable.
Nikki Barrable, I'm the Senior Solicitor for Planning and Highways and the Legal Advisor for the Planning Committee.
Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Chair. Joe Tyler, Democratic and Overview and Scrutiny Officer, and I will be clerking the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you. In addition, there are officers from Democratic Services providing technical support to the meeting. I will now move on to the agenda items for this meeting. Items 1 and 2, election of Chair and Vice Chair. As was advised following advice sought from the Monitoring Officer at Council on Tuesday the 9th of June, items 1 and 2 on today's agenda will be postponed until after the annual Council meeting has taken place. I will now ask Mr. Tyler if there are any apologies or substitutes for this meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. We have received no apologies for attendance for this meeting, and therefore there are no substitutes for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. I have a request to speak from Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought this was perhaps the best point to speak. I may have to leave the meeting. I'm waiting for a call back on the vets. I think my dog might have broken his tail, so I'm waiting for a call back on an appointment. So I am sorry, but I may need to leave. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. Declarations of interest. If committee members have any declarations of interest, please indicate by typing RTS in the instant messenger conversation panel on the left-hand side of the screen. Is that you, Councillor Dunlop?
No, Chairman, I'm sorry. It was from the one I've just made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Confirmation of minutes. Unless anyone indicates otherwise, I will assume that the committee agrees to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May 2020 as an accurate record.
Chairman, Joe Tyler, Democratic Services. It was brought to my attention that minute number 158, unfortunately, Councillor Mike Brooks' name was unintentionally omitted from the list of councillors who gave a verbal representation. That was for the goods yard application. And so with the committee's consent, I will amend that record accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. On minute 156, which is the 19 Avon Wharf Bridge Street application, during that conversation, I did want to amend the condition, which I did state at the time, but it seems that the condition was never amended, and it was taken forward as how it was written. So I don't know whether I need some clarification from Mr. Hodges perhaps around why that wasn't changed.
Mr. Hodges.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the condition that was on the report before members referred to materials as per the stated plans and application form. Members expressed some concern that the material should match the existing building. And so the condition was changed as part of the decision issued. And we did, I had a conversation with Mr. Tyler about ensuring that the minutes represented that. So the planning permission that is issued is condition 3, materials to match the existing building, rather than the condition on the submitted on the application report, which referred to materials as per stated. So it's the permission is issued with the materials to match as requested by the members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodges.
Okay, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the same thing as 19 Avon Moor. Again, the minutes aren't quite right. Councillor McCormack did make it very clear that the condition, predominantly that the dark brown colour should still be there, not black aluminium, and also the walls would be painted and they wouldn't be rendered as on the application. And I'm just sorry that this wasn't recorded in the minutes, and it should have been, in my opinion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Mr. Hodges, is that was one of yours as well?
Yes, Chairman. Sorry, I'm just restart my video. Yes, it's the same item and the same issue, Chairman. So let's say the report referred to materials as per stated on the form. Members requested that they should match the existing building in terms of joinery and the conservatory, and so the materials to match condition will cover that and provide that level of control, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Okay, moving on. Public issues. Written statements from members of the public, applicants and ward councillors received by the deadline of 12 noon yesterday. Well, I don't believe the ones for ward councillors are published, so written statements from members of the public and applicants received by the deadline of 12 noon yesterday have been published on the council's website and a link emailed to committee members.
Chair, sorry, Joe Tyler, Democratic Services. Just a correction on that one. Following last committee's approval of the new public speaking protocol, the process today will be that the written statements that we've received before the deadline of 12 noon yesterday will be read out by myself, and that we will also have certain ward councillors joining us for the relevant applications to make their statements as per the protocol. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. And I will refer to each written statement, asking the committee to confirm that these have been received and taken into account. Okay, the first planning application on the agenda today, item 8A, 10 Suffolk Road. Just allow Mr. Gould some time to set up.
Thank you, Chairman. Just load the presentation. Grateful, Chairman, if you could indicate when that's appeared on your screen.
I can see it, Mr. Gould. Can all members see it? If not, please RTS on the panel. Carry on, Mr. Gould. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. So the first item planning application on the agenda today is a property at 10 Suffolk Road in Bournemouth Town Centre. This application is submitted in outline and seeks permission for the demolition of the existing building and the erection of a replacement building ranging in height between 3 and 6 stories for the provision of 31 flats and associated basement car parking. So I'll run through the presentation and then I'll just give members a bit more context around the application. So the application site sits on the corner of Suffolk Road and Cambridge Road. Just by way of context, slightly to the north we can see the main Wessex Way running east to west, and then we can see Cambridge Road here, which obviously goes uphill and takes you through to the triangle area of Bournemouth. Just a slightly closer look at the application site, and then moving through to an aerial, again we can see the existing building which sits on the corner of Cambridge and Suffolk Road. We can see the Wessex Way slightly to the north. Moving through to some sort of 3D shots of the existing premises. It's an existing 3-storey building with a mansard roof. Members will start to note there's quite a variation in building size and architectural style in the immediate context. This is another sort of aerial photograph of the existing building on the application site, looking sort of north, and then sort of moving round, looking back now, we can see obviously going up the hill, Cambridge Road, towards the triangle area. You see the application building here, sort of moving slightly around on the compass point, and then dropping down to street scene scale. So we're sort of stood just inside Cambridge Road at the junction with Suffolk Road. Here is the existing application site with the existing building on it. Again, members will note that there's some taller buildings around. Moving slightly further into Cambridge Road, we've got the application building on the right and the immediate neighbour at number 11 here on the left. Slightly further down the hill into Cambridge Road, looking back up the hill again towards the junction with Suffolk Road, we can see the application site in the distance. And now we've moved around into Suffolk Road, so behind us we've got the town centre and the library. And we're looking towards the junction with Cambridge Road. We can see again tall buildings in the distance on the other side of Cambridge Road. From this particular vantage point, the application building is not overly visible due to existing vegetation along the edges of neighbouring plots. As we approach the site, we can now see the existing building. Again, another view taken from the junction of Cambridge Road and Suffolk Road, giving you that sort of wider panoramic view. Moving on through to the plans, this is the general layout plan. Members will note that the vehicular access for the development comes from Cambridge Road. Looking at the main elevations, this is the front elevation fronting Suffolk Road. Members will note how the building ranges in height, stepping up towards the corner of Suffolk Road and Cambridge Road. Again, moving around into Cambridge Road, again, members will note how the building is stepping down in height and scale as it starts to address its relationship with its neighbouring properties in Cambridge Road. This is the elevation that would, side elevation that would face towards number 8 Suffolk Road. And on the other side, we have the elevation that would face towards 11 Cambridge Road. This plan just shows the relationship of the proposed building to some existing trees that reside along the boundary between the application site and number 8 Suffolk Road. Shows that the relationship of the building to the root protection zones. Also shows in these green arrows how careful consideration has been given to window arrangements to negate harmful overlooking of the immediate neighbouring properties. Moving on through to the plans, we can first up we look at the lower level basement car parking area, which you can see is serviced by 2 car lifts. Coming up a level, so to the upper basement, we can see the car lifts again. We can also see that this level of car park is serviced by an undercroft directly accessible from Cambridge Road. There's a roller shutter that can come down there for obviously security reasons. We can also note cycle storage provision as well. Moving on through to the ground floor and the upper levels. I won't dwell too long on these, and I'm happy to field any questions in due course, but what I would point out is that members will start to note that there is obscure glazing along this northern elevation of the development to make the relationship to number 11 Cambridge Road acceptable. And again, more obscure glazing and privacy screens along the edges of the balconies. And as we move up through the building, there we go, to the top floor. And finally, some street scene drawings. The top drawing here shows the street scene in Suffolk Road. Again, you'll note that the building's height is stepping up to address that corner position, and again in Cambridge Road. So, Chairman, as I've said, this application is submitted in outline. Members are being asked to consider the layout, the scale, the access and the appearance of the proposed development. Landscaping remains a reserved matters for a subsequent application if this one is approved. The existing building is operated by Bourne Churches Housing Association and is currently in use as a 22-bed hostel. The proposed development of 31 flats comprises 14 studio units, 15 one-bed units and 2 two-bed units. All of the units meet the technical housing standards, although just the usual sort of air of caution to members that is a document that isn't formally adopted by the council, but we have used it frequently as a sort of a benchmarking assessment. I've noted that the application site is situated on the corner of Cambridge Road and Suffolk Road, and it's within a short walking distance of Bournemouth Town Centre, so the site is in a sustainable location. The building seeks to take advantage of its corner location, and using established urban design principles, the height and the massing is arranged such that the taller elements address the corner of the site. The building then steps down in height to address the scale of its immediate neighbours. The height is commensurate with the development on the opposite side of Cambridge Road and Suffolk Road. The building's appearance is contemporary and geometric in form. The expansive use of glazing and the good use of articulation in the elevations helps to break up the massing. The impact upon neighbouring residences has been fully considered in the report, and appropriate conditions securing obscure glazing and privacy screens are attached to the recommendation. The careful internal design and positioning of windows will also safeguard against harmful overlooking. Adequate bin and cycle storage facilities are provided. The basement houses 2 levels of car parking and is accessed from Cambridge Road via an undercroft, as I've already mentioned, and 2 car lifts. There are a total of 23 car parking spaces within the site, which exceeds the Bournemouth parking SPD of 22 spaces when working on an unallocated basis. Chairman, your officers feel that the scheme has an acceptable relationship to its existing context, to neighbouring properties. It will deliver a policy compliant amount of affordable housing, and this is conditioned in the recommendation. And Chairman, for those reasons, it's your officer's recommendation that the scheme is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. I will now refer to Mr. Tyler, who will read out the written statements that have been received in relation to this application.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So we have received 2 letters of objection from a Mr. Andrew Bennett and Ms. Anita Yates. I will proceed to read out Mr. Andrew Bennett's representation now. I wish to oppose the planning application for the development of 10 Suffolk Road for the following reasons. A. The sheer size of the building, as it is totally out of character with the rest of the properties surrounding it. B. The property will be so high that other properties surrounding it will lose any privacy they already have. C. Parking in the area has been severely reduced and is already causing so many problems for local people to park in the day and at night. People are having to park illegally just to go home in the street that they actually live in. D. The proposed development would have to have 62 underground parking spaces to not have a massive impact on the problem of parking, as I'm sure there are no laws in place to limit 1 car per household, let alone when these people have visitors. It is the duty of the planning department and the council to respect its current residents. This property will have a massive detrimental impact for this area. I will now read out Miss Anita Yates' statement. I am making the following objections to the revised erection plans of the above site, as Bourneside Manor is next door, but lower down Cambridge Road, which adjoins Suffolk Road. The existing building already overlooks it, and so any erection higher than 3 stories will definitely overshadow it and will definitely not be in keeping with surrounding buildings. I am the landlord of flat number 5, in which I have a tenant who initially made objections last year, but at the moment is unwell. Therefore, he is in agreement that I add his name, David Allenson, to these changed plans. Another objection is the vehicular access. 10 Suffolk Road is very close to a blind corner. Basement parking, with the necessary formation of the access, in my opinion, would have to be carefully considered. There is already danger to pedestrians as they attempt to cross the road. Due to the extra amount of traffic in the position indicated on the revised plan, congestion could be increased, which would cause pollution. My address is Brompton Court, Stevens Road, and I intend to visit the live broadcast of the meeting on the 11th of June 2020. Thank you, Chairman. They are the statements in objection. We have received no written statements in support, and there has been no request from a ward councillor to speak to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Members, does anybody wish to comment on this application? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask the officer to go back to those, I think, Google Earth pictures of initially to understand again the impact on height? Because I understood there are some like buildings of similar height, and if the officer could just comment on the overlooking aspect with regards to distance of the other buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hilliard. I hope members can see this aerial photograph that I put back up. So here we have obviously the application building underneath the red arrow. I said at the sort of the top of my presentation, in that slightly wider context, there is some variance in building height. So if I start from the bottom of the screen, you've got these buildings here, which are on the opposite side of Cambridge Road. These are substantial buildings, in fact, rising up to sort of 10 stories in height. As you cross the road and come over towards the application site, along Cambridge Road, there's a mixture of sort of more traditional 2-story buildings. But down here on the corner, we've got a 4/5-story building, and moving along Suffolk Road slightly. I don't know if I'm gonna, if it's, again, we can see buildings that are 4 stories in height here. These buildings down here in Cambridge Road are 3 stories in height. And obviously at the very top of the screen, further up Cambridge Road, again, there's an office block up there, which is substantially taller. So there is that sort of variation in height in that sort of that context, that part of Bourne town centre. To pick up on your question around overlooking, so this photograph shows the application building, and its north elevation facing towards the side elevation of number 11 Cambridge Road, which we can see is a 3-story building. There are a number of windows in that side elevation of number 11 Cambridge Road. which face towards the application site. On the other side, and I'll come back to the floor plans in a moment, Councillor Hilliard. On the other side, we can see that the relationship to number 8 Suffolk Road, there's quite an ample separation gap. But there are some windows in the side elevation of number 8, again, face towards the application site. If I now move through to the floor plans, I won't dwell too long on the ground floor plan, because obviously with sort of boundary treatments you wouldn't expect too much scope for harmful overlooking. But notwithstanding that, because there's a slight bit of topography in play here, there is an obscure glazing condition. So what we've sought to achieve here is that where you have windows that would face directly towards neighbouring properties, so along the top of this plan, as you can see, this is the elevation that would face towards number 11 Cambridge Road. Where you've got directly facing windows, we've taken the opportunity to obscure glaze them, which is acceptable when you have another window in the same room that doesn't require the need to be obscure glazed, because you wouldn't want to create rooms where you've got just obscure glazing, because there'd be no decent outlook for future occupiers. And again, we've run the privacy screen along the outside of the balcony so that any views afforded are sort of to the west. As I move up through to the first floor plan, again, you'll see that relationship again. Where we have windows that are the sole window to a room, because we don't want to obscure glaze them to afford the future occupants of that room a decent outlook, we've taken an opportunity to sort of put in what we would call Oriel windows, which are sort of angled, so the direction of view is away from the immediate neighbour. The same applies as we go up through to the second floor. We've got some obscure glazed windows, but again, these are in a room where you have another window and an outdoor terrace, which gives you a decent outlook. And again, you'll note the use of Oriel windows in certain rooms so that there is an outlook, but it's away from the immediate neighbour. And the same applies along this boundary here, which is the elevation that would face 8 Suffolk Road. Moving on up through the building, once we get to the upper levels, members will note that the building, and you saw this on the elevations, is now sort of stepping away from its neighbour as the height concertinas up towards the corner point. So not only is the building stepping away, because we're now at a significantly higher height, the need to have privacy screens along this terrace, for example, and this terrace on the top floor is negated by the fact that you no longer have direct views across towards the windows in Cambridge Road. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Yeah, thank you for that. That
that
completely answered the questions on addressing that. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure all will have noted that Suffolk Road is a wide road with on one side a long row of Victorian houses of some character and a few, very few, 4 to 5 story apartments. Facing these on the opposite side of the road and the area of the proposed development is a mix of 3 to 4 story buildings containing apartments. These are all of mixed design. However, what they do have in common is a common roof line or height. And whilst the proposed parking arrangements for the new development or proposed development is welcome, I might add for a change, the bulk and mass is not. At 6 stories, I believe its mass and scale would be an overdevelopment to the detriment of the street scene. Therefore, I will not be supporting it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Having a couple of technical issues there. I have had a message that the agent who contested is contesting that he did send in a statement of support for this application before the deadline. Are members happy for that to be read out by Mr. Tyler?
Agreed.
Agreed. I'm okay.
Agreed.
Happy with that.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you, councillors. Mr. Tyler, would you like to read that statement out?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and apologies, members, that had not been brought to my attention previously, but I felt fair to see if you were happy to receive it. So I will now read out the statement in support of the application from Martin Hancock, the BCHA Chief Executive. Bournemouth Churches Housing Association is extremely pleased to see that this planning application has been recommended for approval by your officers. We have worked hard with your officers to address comments received during pre-application discussions and early in the application process. This has resulted in a recommendation for the grant of planning permission, which we wholeheartedly support. The scheme will make the optimum use of a currently underutilised urban site. It is located within the town centre area and is therefore in one of the most sustainable locations in the town, and one of the locations where urban intensification to deliver additional housing is explicitly supported by planning policies, both at the local and national level. The Council has a significant and ongoing unmet need to deliver housing in general, but specifically affordable housing. As a registered provider of social housing that works closely with the Council and Homes England to address issues of homelessness and access to suitable housing, BCHA is committed to increase the supply of affordable housing within the BCP area. The apartments in this development will provide accommodation for local people in full and part-time work and a combination of single people and homeless families. A condition is proposed requiring a provision of 40% affordable housing in accordance with local planning policies. However, in reality, the scheme will be 100% comprised of affordable housing, and it is our intention that they will be made available at social rent levels. The government has recently pledged to create 6,000 new long-term homes for rough sleepers, and others have found themselves homeless and who have been housed during the COVID-19 crisis, underlining the urgent and nationwide need for the delivery of suitable affordable forms of housing. This scheme would make an invaluable contribution to that provision, freeing up supported accommodation once this longer-term housing gets built. The benefits of this scheme cannot therefore be understated. Not only is there a significant need to deliver additional housing across the whole of the council area, there is an even more significant unmet need for the delivery of affordable and social housing. This scheme would make a significant contribution to meeting both of those needs. I would therefore respectfully request that in considering this application at the upcoming committee, you recognise the significant benefits that it will provide. Accept your officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman. That's the end of the statement.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Thank you, members. Councillor Le Poitevin.
Thank you. There's a lot about this scheme that I'm very happy with, particularly the large proportion, possibly up to 100% of affordable housing. It's very much needed. My concern is very much on the lines that have already been touched on by the first two speakers, and that's the positioning and bulk. The officer, Mr. Gould, has referred to the fact that there are a lot of windows in the elevation of 11 Cambridge Road facing the site. Could he clarify whether these are windows to principal rooms and or are they subsidiary or secondary rooms or secondary windows? My concern is that basically this Cambridge Road is more or less running north-south, and therefore the new property will be a very high property to the south of 11 Cambridge Road, and I'm wondering what effect this will have of shadowing on 11 Cambridge Road. I would be grateful if Mr. Gould could address that for me.
Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. I don't have a floor plan for number 11 Cambridge Road, but having seen the site elevation and visited the site this morning, there are a number of windows, a similar amount to what you would see in this front elevation. I would advise the members that the likelihood is that there will be windows serving both habitable and non-habitable rooms in that side elevation facing the application site. Councillor Le Poitevin is correct in terms of her compass orientation. The application site does lie to the south of this immediate neighbour, and therefore there would be the potential for shadows to be thrown to the north towards this immediate neighbour. I showed you the elevations earlier, and I'll just go back to them. This is the elevation that would present itself to Cambridge Road, and so off to the left, obviously, we would have 11 Cambridge Road, and members can see. In fact, I'll probably just zip through to the street scene drawing. Again, you can see how the building is stepping down in height and scale as it gets closer to number 11, and with this sort of meaningful sort of separation gap, and the way that the building is then stepping away up towards its the corner position. Your officers are satisfied that this won't result in a sort of detrimental harmful impact on the outlook for residents of number 11, and in terms of loss of light and overbearing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Gould.
you. It's particularly the overshadowing and the loss of daylight that I'm concerned about. The stepping back won't make an awful lot of difference to that. It's the total height of the building, in my view. Sorry, I'm not sure. My mic kept going on and off. I'm not sure how much of that was audible.
I think we got the point there, Councillor.
Thank you.
Mr. Gould, any more to add on that, or are you happy to?
I picked up most of that as well. It was a bit intermittent, Chairman, but I think, again, I got the point that Councillor's making there. And all I can really say is to reiterate what I've said is that, that we've tried to retain a meaningful gap. There is a difference between sort of direct sunlight and daylight in a planning assessment terms. And light is fairly uncomplicated in one sense, that it will flood into gaps between buildings quite adequately, and so that's been in our mind when we've obviously been mindful of the separation gap, but also the fact that, as I say, the building is stepping away so that the shortest part of the building presents itself to number 11. So we're happy with that relationship, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, hello, Chair. Probably more of an admin one, but I noted that the application had been called in by Councillor Mike Green, and some brief statement of the grounds on which he's done that is included on the summary sheet. Have you got a report from him, or does he intend to speak on this?
Councillor Bartlett, we did not get a statement from him, and he did not respond to say he was attending the meeting. I don't know if Mr. Tyler wants to elaborate.
Thank you, Chairman. No, that's correct. We didn't receive any request to formally attend and speak at the meeting, and there was no written statement that Councillor Green wanted me to read out. Thank you.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt, because in my current presentation mode I don't have the option of requesting to speak in the box. If I may try and aid Councillor Bartlett, this application is what we've referred to as a legacy application. So it was submitted when this area was Bournemouth Borough Council, and the scheme at that time was subject to the Bournemouth Borough Council scheme of delegation. Members who sat on planning committee in Bournemouth will remember there was what I refer to as the magic number in terms of 10 reps. So the application was actually triggered to planning committee by the old Bournemouth Borough Council scheme of delegation, because it received 10 or more letters of representation. So in one sense, Chairman, I understand that Councillor Green also put a calling in, but it would have come to committee in any instance due to the number of reps received, and by virtue of it being a legacy application.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Councillor Bartlett, do you have any?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it would have been nice to have heard from Councillor Green on this one. It was his opinion I was seeking, but being the ward councillor and knowing it, the area really well. But I've looked closely at the scheme. I really like the way that the building's been stepped back as it's increased in height, in order to overcome the overshadowing and overbearing issues, etc. I quite like it. I'll be supporting to grant the application.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of my concerns, which was about the shadowing, has been largely answered, but I also noticed, looking at the map, that the worst shading effect would actually be on the car park area as opposed to the area out the back of number 11. I think because it's been stepped back adjacent to number 11, on the Suffolk Road side, it pretty well matches the height of what's opposite, which is to the south of it anyway. So I find overall this is an acceptable application. It's unusual in as much as it, despite being very close to the town centre, it provides pretty much as much car parking as you would expect, and more than other developments near the town centre provide. So I think overall it's acceptable, but I would like comments as to whether we are talking about sort of major shading, and just to confirm that, because I don't know number 11, so I don't know what's behind it, but I'm assuming that behind it there's a grassy area or something, some sort of amenity area that looks as if it would get direct light for part of the day.
Mr. Gould, do you wish to?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm just going back through some of the aerial shots that I showed members. So this one might help Councillor Trent's question. So obviously here we've got the application site, and then there's number 11 Cambridge Road. And Councillor Trent referred to the parking area that's sort of in between the two buildings and out the front. There is a line of trees along that boundary, as you can see, but beneath that there will be a sort of an amenity area for the residents of Cambridge Road, number 11.
Happy with that, Councillor Trent?
Yeah, I think bearing in mind that there's trees anyway, so it would be overshadowed during the summer months anyway. I think the fact that there might be a little bit more overshadowing for part of the day is probably acceptable in that context. I think it's actually making good use of urban space, and the fact that it's 100% affordable housing, I think is to its credit.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we go back to the street scene showing number 11 adjacent to the proposed development? The map that we had before, the diagram. Oh, that one will do.
That one?
Yes. No, there was the street scene. One before that. That's the one. Go back.
Photograph, Councillor?
No, the one back. You just passed it.
There must be a delay. There must be a delay.
Right, that one. Thank you. I am mystified by the sudden long debate on this one. I think most of the buildings in that street are significant by their mediocrity, and this one looks carefully designed, different, well planned, and stepped back from its neighbouring property. The adjacent trees to the neighbouring property are as tall as the property and certainly would give considerable shade. This building is to the south of the property, but during midday the sun is way over the top, much higher than this building, even in winter. So it will not take light away from, or direct light away from the neighbouring property to any possible measuring value. If they were east-west, where the sun is lower in the morning and the evening, there might be an argument for the overshadowing argument, but I absolutely don't see it here. I don't see any reasons for refusal, and I will certainly be supporting it.
Did you want to make a move there, Councillor Stribley?
I'm happy to propose, Chairman, that this application is approved.
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I have two other councillors who wish to speak on the debate before we go to the vote. Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of points. Firstly, clarification. Councillor Green could not be here this afternoon. He is previously engaged on another item. I did speak with him regarding this. His call-in was when the building was going to be 8 stories high, and I believe that the officers have now negotiated this down to 6. So I believe that he is much more satisfied with it at that height. I think the building is a good design. The way it is stepped up from those lower buildings up to the corner is a great benefit to the area. As everyone else has said, affordable housing, exactly what we need. It's just right. If it's 100%, we can't ask for any more. And I think Mr. Gould has explained fully the overshadowing items on it, and I will be fully supporting this application, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey, and thank you for the clarification on Councillor Green. Councillor Lawton.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Just a couple of quick points. I mean, I agree with, and I will be supporting the application. But just one thing, in my previous life, before May 2019, sorry, that area, that building was used as a rehabilitation unit for prisoners who had just been released from prison, funnily enough. Although it's not a planning application, I would just like to know, or does anybody know, where will that facility go? Will it go within the conurbation area, or is it just completely closed?
Mr. Gould, do you have any information on that, or I assume that's not a planning matter, so you may not know.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I can't provide an answer to that one.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy with that. It's just that if that facility is going to close, will it be replaced somewhere within the conurbation? That would be of interest, because it is a very useful place to rehabilitate prisoners who've been in relatively either short or long-term sentences, and to rehabilitate them into their society.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Yes.
Sorry for interrupting, but I don't have the function to request to speak in presentation mode. Actually, just listening to Councillor Lawton there, and I think it's referenced in the report, I believe that the most recent use of that premises has been for helping homeless people. And so I'm not certain it is still currently in use as helping people who are coming out of jail.
Okay. Mr. Gould may well be right. I mean, it's some time since I visited, and it may well have changed to homeless people. Okay.
Okay. Councillor Stribley.
Yes, Chairman. Sorry to come back in on this one, but could I ask you to keep the debate to the planning application? We're possibly faced with a 6-hour meeting. And whilst I appreciate what the last 2 speakers' comments, it had absolutely nothing to do with this application.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I really like this design, actually. I think it's a great improvement on a fairly uninspiring building that's already there. I appreciate there will be some shadowing in the winter months. I think there probably still will be some overshadowing, but the building's very cleverly stepped back to minimise that. So I'll be supporting this one. I like this one very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have one more councillor to speak, Councillor Bartlett, and then we'll go to the vote. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, just to clarify that I have seconded the motion, but I'd like to congratulate the officers on working with BCHA on obviously working on this scheme hard to come up with an acceptable development. In particular, it's lovely to see the way they've addressed the parking issues, and which is obviously a fairly expensive way to do it, but they've obviously tried very hard to come up with an acceptable solution. So congratulations to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I have a motion on the table from Councillor Stribley, seconded by Councillor Bartlett, to accept the recommendation on this application and to grant it. Unless, Mr. Gould, you have anything to say, I know you can't RTS on this, so...
No, Chairman, that's everything from me, thank you.
Okay, I shall go to the vote. I shall read out each councillor's name. If you could respond with either... Excuse me. For, against, or abstain. So, I shall start with Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Lepoidevin.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
Against.
Councillor Stribley.
For.
Councillor Trent.
For.
And myself, Councillor Bull, for. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the total number of votes for the motion is 14. Total number of votes against the motion is 1, and there were no abstentions. So that motion is carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. So that application is granted. We shall now move on to the next application. I should just allow Mr. Evans time to get his presentation up, but it's 8B, the Goods Yard 14 station approach in Broadstone.
Thank you, Chairman. And as before, if you could perhaps confirm that the presentation is available to members on the screen.
I can see it. If any members can't, can they please RTS in the screen?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The application is to extend the Goods Yard pub at Broadstone from one bed and one 2-bed flat. Members may recall that we've had an application on adjacent land at the last committee. Just put into context, Broadstone in the northwestern reaches of the borough. To put the context together, the site sits at the junction of Moor Road and Station Approach, with the sports centre, the significant bulk of the sports centre opposite, and immediately to the east of it, the playing ground, or the schoolyard rather, of Broadstone First School. Just to put that into some three-dimensional context, the pub itself, which is a locally listed building within a conservation area, primarily 2-storey with further accommodation within the roof, with single-storey elements wrapping around the rear. Again, context, 3-storey flats on the other side of Moor Road, 3-storey more historic buildings with ground floor commercial use and 2 floors of residential above. Just draw attention to the elevations that the pub presents to the street, the 2-storey substantial roof of the Victorian facade, and as it turns the corner into Moor Road, a significant single-storey element to the building. The range of greenery at the rear, members who were at the last committee will recall there was previously some accommodation and a Skittles alley associated with the pub, which was demolished some time ago. And what you're seeing on the side there is the self-sown regeneration from that site being left unused. I'll also draw your attention to a clump of trees at the corner of the site. Some of them suppressed, but there is a significant and prominent Scots pine within that group. Just put it into, bring it down to street level and give you that context. So again, the secondary facade to Moor Road, the main principal facade with the very prominent gables being off to the right to the west elevation of the pub. You can just highlight that single-storey element and the clump of trees to the rear of the site with the school playground beyond. Just a slightly further away aspect, looking west along Moor Road, and again that clump of trees in which the dominant Scots pine is very apparent, and the manner in which it's suppressed some of the other small and secondary trees around it is equally apparent. The proposals, which I'll come to in a moment, require or propose, not require, propose removal of all of the trees in that clump other than the dominant Scots pine, which would be retained. To put it into a context of policy, the application site just off the top of the plan there, just outside of the principal commercial and retail frontage of the Broadston local centre, and to take it into, and the red line being the conservation area within which it sits, and to take that down to another level of detail, the Broadston neighbourhood plan again identifies the site within the central area where there is a presumption in favour of 1 and 2 bedroom, or an identified need for additional 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings. You can see it sits comfortably within that area where that is an objective of the plan. And again, just draw your attention to the boundaries of the conservation area, the Tudor and Golf Links Road conservation area. Moving on to the proposals themselves, again, just to highlight that north elevation of the pub, 2-storey, single-storey, and you can see in the proposals before you the intention is to go above the single-storey element and project the 2-storey element out to the boundary to the rear of where that clumps of trees are at the moment. You can see that there is a pedestrian access beneath the building provided. We'll come down to the layout one, but that provides access for residents to all of the facilities associated with the flats, the cycle stores, the bins, and also pedestrian access to the car parking and to the external staircase that will give access to the first floor flats. Again, just the general elevations of the scheme, and I think I'd draw your attention to the way that the proposed extension, sitting above the existing single-storey elements, the proposed extension very much picks up the architectural detailing of the existing locally listed building without either overpowering it or detracting from it. So very much complementing and preserving the existing character of the locally listed pub. Taking that to the layout of the site, and just to put some context there, the undercroft access for pedestrian access to the flats, the external staircase which currently serves existing flats above the pub, which would provide the access for the 2 flats, pedestrian access through into the courtyard area, vehicular access, sharing an access with the scheme that some of you that were at last committee will recall was recently resolved to be approved on the existing car park to the south of the application site, so sharing an access with that into car parking within the courtyard. Again, just highlighting that Scots pine, which is the dominant tree in that group of trees, in that clump of trees, which would be retained. The ground floor accommodation, just to emphasise that point, no habitable accommodation on the ground floor, but the pedestrian access through underneath the building, giving access to the refuse store for the residential, the refuse store for the pub, bike store, and the 5 parking spaces that would serve the residential element of the pub. That is to say 1 space for each of the 2 flats proposed, and 3 spaces to serve the existing 3 flats that are already above the pub. Moving on to the first floor where the accommodation is, not such a clear image, I'm afraid. A 1-bed flat, 2-bed flat, accessed by external staircase into a shared access. Can I just draw attention to that one change to the elevation of the north elevation of the pub, the inclusion of an additional window to one of the rooms within one of the existing first floor flats to replace a first floor window that will be lost because of its orientation into the development site. So, put all of that into context. The new window on the side elevation of the pub, the proposed extension to the rear sitting comfortably behind the dominant facade of the building, the building that you considered at your last meeting put into context to give some indication of the perhaps emerging character of its surroundings, looking at the north elevation where most of the work is to be undertaken. Again, the first floor element sitting behind the existing ground floor element, the treatment of the building in a manner that's subservient but reflects the character of the building. Chairman, the recommendation before you is, given that the flats are in a highly sustainable location, They preserve and enhance both the locally listed building and the conservation area. They do provide biodiversity enhancement and replacement tree planting for those of the trees that would be lost. They provide for safe pedestrian movement, cycling and parking and loading around the site associated with the development and the pub, and they have already provided appropriate habitat mitigation. Chairman, the scheme is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I shall now refer to Mr. Tyler, who will read out the written statements that have been received relating to this application before passing on to Councillor Mike Brooke, who will address the committee as the ward councillor. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So for this application, we have received no written statements in objection and one written statement in support. And the written statement comes from Mr. Giles Moyer, who is the agent writing on behalf of the applicant. So I will read his statement now. I am writing on behalf of the applicants for the above application, Prime Tower Properties Limited, in support of their proposal. It is important to note that the proposed access, loading bay and delivery arrangements were approved at the May 2020 meeting of the Council's Planning Committee as part of the proposals on the adjoining site. Prime Tower Properties are an established local development company employing a locally based workforce. They have delivered many high-quality, successful developments across the BCP Council area. Prior to the submission of the application, the applicant sought pre-application advice from the Council and also engaged with the Broadstone Neighbourhood Forum to seek their views on the proposed development. The application was amended to take account of the advice provided at the pre-application stage and also to respond to the comments provided by the Neighbourhood Forum. The technical reports which accompany the application include an appraisal by Graham Keevil of Keevil Heritage Services. The applicant, having successfully maintained and invested in the goods yard for some 13 years, fully appreciate its heritage value and are mindful of the need to respect its character and qualities in any proposed extensions. The pub employs 24 people and supports its local community. This planning application was submitted 13 months ago because of the need to generate more income, and the additional rental income from the 2 flats was vital to the sustainability of the pub. With the massive problems caused by COVID-19 and lockdown, this extra rental income is even more essential. The scale of the proposed extension has been designed to ensure that the public house remains as the principal building. When viewed from station approach, the existing building, being the public house, remains the main built form within the street scene. When viewed from Moor Road and from the east across the school and community buildings, the extension will sit below the height of the principal building, reinforcing its subservient scale. The scale of the proposal does not detract from the historic connections of the goods yard to the railway heritage of Broadstone. Although the extension is of a subservient scale, it retains the same spacing and rhythm of the principal building. The eaves line of the extension is broken with a series of dormer windows. The principal references in the conservation area appraisal refer to the materials of the building, these being a warm orange brick. It is proposed that the extension mirrors the palette of materials of the principal building. The proposed extension accommodates improved enclosed refuse storage for both the public house and existing apartments, which are currently open nor in keeping with the listed building. This proposal solves this important issue. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Councillor Mike Brooke.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fine. Thank you. I will begin, but I've got 2 little points to make before I actually read my statement out, and that is that the planning report from the officer has 2 omissions. One is in the planning history, when in 2008 an application for 2 flats was refused, and that went to appeal, and that appeal was dismissed on the 7th of January 2009. That isn't within the planning, recorded in the planning history. And because this is an extension, there should have been reference to Broadstone Neighbourhood Plan BP Policy 6, which relates specifically to extensions, and there is no reference in the report whatsoever. The red card was submitted on behalf of residents and the neighbourhood forum and was based on the original application. Concerns had been raised over road safety related to the access for delivery vehicles, and because it was felt the design of the extension was out of character, did not complement the features of the goods yard building itself, and failed to enhance the conservation area. Since then, some revisions have been made to both access for delivery vehicles and the design. I was asked recently by Mr. Moyer to consider removing the red card to allow a delegated decision. I gave this considerable thought and went back to members of the neighbourhood forum as well as other residents who had objected to see if they were amenable to the red card being withdrawn. The responses that I received showed there were still concerns over road safety as well as the design of the extension, and I see it as my duty as a ward councillor to bring these concerns to committee so they can be debated openly and transparently. Now, with regard to road safety, I will make the point, but I accept that the loading bay was approved at the previous application last month. However, there are still concerns about safety and delivery and waste collection vehicles. It is felt that the proposed loading bay is too near what is a blind corner on a relatively busy road and could also conflict with what is currently a safe walking route to and from school for many children. If you're familiar with this road, you will know that because of the parking bays on the opposite side of the road, vehicles tend to stay close to the pub side of the road, whether they are coming from Station Approach or Wentworth Drive. Also, unless it is patrolled regularly, cars will park in the bay. They frequently park on double yellow lines near the school and youth centre as it is, and I believe that it is a contrived solution to an extension which is too large. So to the extension itself, it is accepted that the roof line of the proposed new build is subservient to the main building, but overall, because of its length, it looks more like a barn with excessive mass and bulk. The dormers are relatively small and because of their flat roofs accentuate the line and dominance of the roof rather than match the 19th century character of the building, which is locally listed and is also classed as a heritage asset. While the building materials are appropriate, the proposed extension is too large and of a design that fails to fully reflect the character of the building and conservation area. It can therefore be argued that the proposal is contrary to policies BP4 and BP6 of the Neighbourhood Plan and policy PP27 of the Poole Local Plan. I strongly believe an improved design can be achieved and would therefore ask the committee to defer their decision to enable a design to be produced that better complements the Goodyard Public House and enhances the conservation area. Thank you. I would like to thank the committee for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Just if anybody from the Bourne Borough Council or the old Christchurch Council, the reference to a red card is the former Borough of Poole call-in process. I will now invite any committee member who wishes to speak to do so by typing RTS in the conversation panel. Please only use the panel for that purpose. When you have completed what you have to say, I will check that you have finished and refer to officers if necessary. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm quite surprised to hear what Councillor Brooke has said about this, and I do appreciate he is ward councillor for the area. I'm somewhat relieved by this application. I was concerned that what was proposed might have unacceptable overlooking to the school playground. This doesn't have that. It is in the style of the old building and it is subservient to it. And actually, I think it will improve the look of the Moor Road frontage, which it runs along. I would like to see and be assured there will be a comprehensive landscaping, however small, scheme there is to the fencing in front. It does appear that that is so from the picture, but I can't see that in detail. But with assurance that the whatever landscaping is continued up the site in front of the new part of the development, and that the remaining pine tree is protected, obviously, well during construction, I can see no reasons whatsoever to refuse this one. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I agree entirely with my colleague, Councillor Strively. I actually think that the extension does improve the character of the building and offer a betterment to the conservation area, particularly by removing the flat roof, introducing a pitched roof to that elevation. I think it looks very nice. I see nothing wrong with this application at all, and I will support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. As we've seen from the slideshow, the goods yard is on the corner of Station Road with Moor Road, and it is a pub with accommodation. As for the requested extension, I see no problem with this request. Indeed, a recently approved and substantial development of 33 apartments was debated next door to this proposal at a prior meeting. I do not see that this development should be refused and believe it would have limited to zero impact on parking, traffic or overlooking of the nearby school. And the proposal is within the character of the building, which of itself has some character, and therefore I would be supporting the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I like the design and I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do any other councillors wish to speak on this? Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. I too agree. I think it's a very good design. It's well worth being in there. And as there is no other comments, I think I will make the move to grant this application as stated by the officers. Thank you, Chairman.
I would like to second that, Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. I have two other councillors wishing to speak. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small detail on the trees. Surprise, surprise, coming from me. I think that the removal of the suppressed trees is definitely the right thing to do in landscape management. However, could Officer Evans just confirm where the replacements are going to be, or if there's any kind of offset planting to that, please? But as a design, I very much like it, actually. Thank you.
Mr. Evans.
Chairman, let me just draw your attention to that image, if I can, and give also in passing some reassurance to Councillor Mr. Stribbley that there is a condition requiring a landscape scheme, which includes 6 replacement trees. Members will appreciate there's not a lot of space once you've removed the suppressed trees around the dominant pine, and so the majority of the planting, so whilst there is general planting available, the majority of the substantial replacement tree planting would be in that area between the two developments, where there's an aspect of it from Station Approach, and of course trees reaching maturity in this position will be very prominent, seen across the very open playground of the school. So I suggest that the proposed replacement planting is more than adequate to replace the lost trees. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Does that satisfy your question, Mr. Councillor Barron?
Yeah, it would be quite nice to see a pavement tree near the beer garden, but you can't have everything you wish for. But no, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I was going to move to approve the application, but Councillor Kelsey jumped in there, so, and it's been seconded, so that's it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Mr. Evans, if you have nothing further to say, I shall go to the vote.
Nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members, in the usual way, I shall read out your name and ask you to vote for, against or abstain, starting with councillor, sorry, I'll just say what we're voting on. I think that would be, the move is to accept the recommendation and to grant the application. So councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Le Poivre Devin.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Stribley.
For.
Councillor Trent.
For.
And myself, Councillor Bull, for. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. 15 votes for the motion, so that is unanimous. The motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. So that application is granted. And we should now move on to the next application, which is 8C 81 to 83 Hankinson Road in Bournemouth. I'll just give Mr. Gould a chance to set up his presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. That should hopefully be coming up on members' screens shortly.
I can see it. If anyone can't see it, please indicate on the panel. Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members again. So next on the next item on the agenda is 81 to 83 Hankinson Road, which is a scheme for the erection of an infill bungalow. Just having a quick look at the site location plan. So we've got Hankinson Road here, running sort of east and west. We've got number 81 Hankinson Road here, number 83, and then we've got an existing infill bungalow at the rear of 81, so 81A, and this is the site here. The star's just slightly moved off of centre. Moving to an aerial shot just to give members a bit of context. We can see the application site up there underneath the red blob. Hankinson Road, immediately to the south, running parallel to Hankinson Road, we've got Maxwell Road. And immediately to the south of that, we've got Winton Recreation Area. Over to the east, running due north, we've got Charminster Road, one of the local shopping parades here, where there's a co-op. Coming in a bit closer to the application site. So this is the application site etched in red around there. So where the star is, the proposed bungalow will be just to the south of that, alongside the existing bungalow at 81A Hankinson Road. Having a look at the proposed site layout plan. So over on the left-hand side, we can see that the vehicular access that will come in, that is an existing vehicular access that serves 81A Hankinson Road, running between 81 and 83. Here is the proposed bungalow with the area sort of shaded green around it, and there'll be a small extension of the driveway to provide parking for the proposed bungalow, and then obviously there's a turning head so that vehicles can enter and leave the site in forward gear. Having a quick look at the proposed elevations, this is a fairly simple design, single-storey bungalow, no roof accommodation proposed, and just draw members' attention to this particular plan because there is some quite severe topography going across this site. On the left-hand side of the drawing, you'll see reference to the existing two-storey house that fronts number 83 that fronts Hankinson Road. As you enter the site and you go down the existing driveway, you'll see obviously it's sloping down as you go to the south, and then you get down to this level where you've got 81A, and the proposed bungalow will be built on that level. So there is quite a drop from the properties fronting Hankinson Road down to the application site, and then there's a further drop down to properties to the south in Maxwell Road. Just having a quick look at some photographs. So here we can see the existing site entrance to 81A here, and then the next series of photographs shows you enter that driveway. Starting with the top left-hand image, you can see that you're going downhill. On the right, you can see the terrace serving the rear of 81 Hankinson Road, and there's 81A, as I've previously referenced. You can see the sort of changes in levels. This bottom right-hand image, we've come further down the driveway now. We're now looking across towards where the proposed bungalow will be in this area here. This next set of images shows the existing parking area in the top left-hand corner to 81A. So it will be replicated on the other side to provide 2 spaces for the proposed bungalow. And this bottom right image shows you the topography as we look back up the driveway towards Hankinson Road. This next image is taken from the rear of 83 Hankinson Road, so we're looking into where the bungalow will be. We can just see the roof of the adjacent 81A. In the background we can see the rear of properties in Maxwell Road. There's a lot of vegetation on the site at present. There has been a full arboricultural assessment. A lot of this vegetation is just shrubbery and vegetation, so none of it is protected in this area here where the bungalow will be sited, and so there'd be no, in principle, objection to its removal. Looking at the next series of images, again, we've moved just slightly to the east now. This is the existing driveway serving 85A Hankinson Road, so another infill bungalow that members in that top left image will just see the roof. It's currently under construction, nearing completion, and again in the bottom right a slightly closer look of that infill bungalow as it nears completion. Okay, so sorry, just bear with me. So I've outlined the fact that the proposal for an infill bungalow. Members will note in the report that infill development has become an established form of development in Hankinson Road over the last 15 years or so. We see infill developments to the rear of 81, 85 and 97 to 99 Hankinson Road. The scale and design of the proposed bungalow, as I've shown you on the plans, is in keeping with the character of these infill developments that have occurred. Adequate separation distances are retained to properties in Maxwell Road and in Hankinson Road. We're also mindful of the topography, which in some regards helps the single-storey nature of the bungalow to sit into its context. There is new boundary treatment proposed, again to just safeguard against any potential for harmful overlooking from the rear windows of the existing properties fronting Maxwell Road, fronting Hankinson Road, and in respect of the properties in Maxwell Road, there are boundary treatments proposed there, as well as existing vegetation combined with good separation distances. I've drawn members' attention to the topography. There is reference made in some of the representation to a protected tree. If I just draw members' attention to this plan, this is a plan that accompanied the arboricultural method statement. This is the tree in question. This is 81A, so this is already built, as we've seen in the photographs, and this is the proposed bungalow. So we can see that the bungalow is outside of the root protection zone for that protected tree. So again, this doesn't raise any concerns from your tree officer. Chairman, officers have worked hard on this application, and we feel that the site is located in a sustainable location. It seeks to make a more efficient use of urban land, and the proposals are in keeping with the design and scale and siting of other nearby infill bungalows. and for the reasons that have been set out in the report, we feel this will protect the amenities of the locality. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. I shall now refer to Mr. Tyler, the Democratic Officer, who will read out the written statements that have been received relating to this application before passing on to Councillor Chris Rigby, the Ward Councillor, who will address the committee. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So for this application, we have received 2 written statements in objection. They are from Mr. Richard Handyside and Mr. Stephen Sellier. I will proceed to read out Mr. Richard Handyside's statement. I am a resident of Maxwell Road in Bournemouth. We live very close to the application to build a bungalow at 81 to 83 Hankinson Road. We have no objection to the bungalow, but it's the felling of trees which my wife and I are concerned about. There is a large beautiful tree at the rear of the above property, which is over 100 years old. We suspect the builder will remove this tree in the first instance. Firstly, it will expose the rear of our property to many houses in Hankinson Road. We already have had to suffer people staring at us after the development of a bungalow next door to the development address. The whole area has large trees forming privacy between properties. 2 trees have already been removed at number 87. The trees provide a haven for wildlife which is slowly being destroyed by rear developing in gardens. Please consider the environment. And members, I would just like to draw your attention to an email that I have circulated, which is the statement from Mr. Stephen Sellier. I've circulated it as it has some photographs that he's referred to. So I will read that out now, and if you could refer to that document. Thank you. Apologies, just waiting for it to load. Okay. My wife and I are local residents, owners of 53 Maxwell Road, which backs onto the property 85 Hankinson Road. We object to this dwelling being built for the following reasons. Further reduction of the green corridor that lies between Hankinson and Maxwell Road. This habitat is home to foxes, squirrels, numerous species of birds such as the chaffinch, blackbird, robin, magpie, pigeon, sparrow, thrush. They are often seen in gardens, as are bats during the evening. Further overlooking from another dwelling, currently there is a bungalow at the rear of both 85 and 81 Hankinson Road. Further pressure on parking for local residents in Hankinson Road and difficult, dangerous access to driveways on already crowded roads. In addition to this, I have accessed the tree survey and have serious concerns to its accuracy in determining trees that are affected. The company have already stated that the findings of the report were severely limited due to being unable to access trees directly. I refer to this poor photograph included by the company that is out of date, that is provided by the tree marked C, that is no longer there and was cut down to be replaced by a bungalow at the rear of 85. It refers to a tree T1, but it does not consider the tree marks A or B. The report refers to B as CL, cherry laurel. We contest this, however, as this is another tree of some considerable maturity and height. Tree B I estimate to be 30 foot tall, and tree A I estimate to be 50 foot tall. These are both within the boundary of 83 Hankinson Road and will be affected by this development. As a result, we consider this survey to be completely incompetent in its assessment of affected trees. Both of these trees, A and B, are home to significant wildlife as previously mentioned. Further photographic evidence in support of these points is shown below. In the photographs it says this is a view of tree A and behind it tree B from our decking area, both trees within proposed development boundary. This shows the effects of both existing bungalows on the privacy of gardens for the residents of Maxwell Road. This is considerably worse when trees are not green. This shows the 2 mature trees the report does not refer to, both clearly within boundary and not inspected for this report. Diameter of trunk of tree A is 60 centimetres and is approximately 50 foot high. And the next photo, this shows a further smaller tree that is about 15 foot high and much further in the boundary of 83, that again has not been mentioned, further highlighting the incompetence of the report. In conclusion, we do not think that there is the capacity to build yet another dwelling in this green corridor without a huge environmental impact for the wildlife, further impact on the already dense parking in Hankinson Road, and further invasion of privacy for residents' gardens of Maxwell Road. Should these trees within the boundary of 83 need to be felled to accommodate this, then this would be devastating for all concerned. End of statement. Thank you, Chairman. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. I'll now invite Councillor Rigby, the Ward Councillor, to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making this representation after being contacted by a number of residents about it. The development of this infill property between Hankinson Road and Maxwell Road should be refused planning permission based on several reasons, which I'll continue to outline. The first is due to the nature of the site. With Hankinson Road sitting higher than Maxwell Road, the proposed bungalow will have direct views into the properties at 51, 53 and 55 Maxwell Road. This reason alone could be seen as a material condition, which in itself could be enough to refuse the granting of planning permission. Secondly is the potential for overdevelopment of this area. There are already several bungalows which have been infilled into what would be the original gardens of the properties on Hankinson Road. While this kind of development in itself is not a problem, continuing along this precedent will see the loss of an important green corridor, which is essential not just for the preservation of the local wildlife, but also to act as protection against flooding. We already see a lot of roads in Winton East flood after periods of heavy rain, and continuing to reduce green spaces is going to exacerbate this problem. The simplest way to remove the issue of flooding from an area is to allow the rainfall to naturally soak away through the green spaces. The most up-to-date methods of preventing flooding is providing green or blue roofs on larger developments or designing in rain gardens to direct water away through green spaces. And this is done to meet sustainable urban drainage conditions. The simplest way to do this on smaller developments is to leave green areas without development and allow the existing land to deal with the problems how nature intended. I'd also recently been informed that one of the trees that is going to have to be removed for this development could be up to 100 plus years old. The area has already seen similar age tree removed for an early development at 85 Hankinson Road. And if this is the case, then other similar trees should be in the possession of a tree protection order to prevent their removal. Finally, I've been in discussions with councillors in the neighbouring Queen's Park ward, along with council officers, about potential changes to road layouts on Charminster Road. During these conversations, the high level of traffic on Hankinson Road was raised as a serious issue due to it being a well-known local rat run. Along with the unavoidable double parking on the road, traffic has a tough time navigating as the pedestrians and cyclists pass in as well. This gives me cause for concern due to high potential for accidents, adding to the number of cars accessing the area, despite given parking provision, is just not sustainable for this road. I hope you'll take on board all these points raised, and I look forward to hearing your decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I will now invite any committee member who wishes to speak to do so by typing RTS in the conversation panel. Once you've spoken, it doesn't prevent you from speaking again, but please keep it to fresh points rather than going over the same ground. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I see, please, the site plan showing both Hankinson and Maxwell Road on it, please?
Is that the one you're after, Councillor?
I think it is, yes. Thank you very much. I am really surprised at this, but it's obviously an inherited situation because it is absolutely nothing more than backland development. There's certainly enough land in this area between Hankinson Road and Maxwell Road. Had there been a comprehensive scheme taking in a little bit of land from the rear of properties in both roads. But because the precedent is already there, there are similar accesses and rear properties already, and because this one is actually, I believe, sharing the same drive as its neighbour, I don't like it, but I can't see a planning reason to refuse it. And I hope we don't have too many more of these situations, because it would be nice to see areas properly enhanced. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Le Poitevin.
Thank you. Before I come on to my comments, the objection, the second objection has raised some questions with me that I'd like Mr. Gould to address before I come on to my comments, and namely about these trees. Are the trees he's referring to actually in the site, the rear garden of 83? Because it didn't look quite as if they were to me, but I couldn't see it clearly enough. And if they are, or even if they're not, have they got a TPO on them?
Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. I'll start by just sort of re-showing members this photograph taken from the rear of 83 Hankston Road. So this is obviously the parcel of land where the proposed bungalow would be sited. I'll come on to the plan that I showed members from the arboricultural report in a second. We heard comments through the deputation from people who back onto 85 Hankinson Road, so that would be the plot immediately to the east here. So the reference to trees that we've heard, well, I've already touched upon the lime tree over here, which again I showed you on the plan is to be retained, it's protected, and the proposed development lies outside of its root protection zone. There are reference to other trees. Now, clearly, there will be sections of the site that will need to be cleared in order to facilitate the development. If I move to the plan that I showed members from the ARB report, it doesn't show any other trees within the site that will also be felled. There is some proposal to remove some of the existing laurel hedging. But if members felt that that was a particular issue and needed to be retained, you know, along, for example, the rear boundary to safeguard or further safeguard the amenities of residents in Maxwell Road, that could be looked at. When the tree officer assesses an application like this, obviously they receive the report, but they also do a site visit themselves. And if the report has been found to be have shortcomings, then you know, we would expect the tree officer to point those out. That isn't the case in this instance, and as I say, so any reference to trees that are suggested to be felled, that's not supported by the information that we've received. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Thank you. Can I now? I'll now make the comments that I originally RTS'd for.
Yep.
It wasn't until I went to see the site that I grasped exactly how much the land falls down towards the site. The access is extremely steep. I really wouldn't like to have to drive that or even walk it in icy weather, but we are where we are. Equally, the bungalow that's there that it makes you realise how cramped the site is. And if this was a first application for establishing a new principle, if you like, I would not be at all happy about agreeing to it. But given that the virtually identical bungalow on a virtually identical site is already there and lived in, I really don't see, like Councillor Stribley, that there are any planning reasons to refuse it. I don't like it. I'm not happy. I certainly wouldn't want to live there, but I can't see really that there's any reasons to refuse it. And if it went to appeal, I think the appeal would be upheld and that we would lose.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we should leave matters of appeals being granted or not to the inspectors, but thank you for your comments. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've visited this property as I do with all properties. I managed to walk the site and the sites either side of the proposal. The immediate properties to either side of the proposal, as with the proposal, consist of a rear garden of about 30 feet, which suddenly drops steeply away, as we can see from the pictures. The area of scrubland behind is largely unattractive overgrowth with some merit for some trees. Unless that was the case before the scrubland properties either side of the proposed development were given permission, which was correctly, in my view, granted to build bungalows on each of the two plots. I've also noted that, in my view, overlooking is somewhat limited. And as this proposal is similar to the adjoining two, and it should, in my view, be approved. In addition, it does offer up 2 parking spaces, which is a benefit of many other houses on Hawkinstone Road do not have this facility, with on-street parking being the norm. Unfortunate or not, I do not see a reason, any other reason but to approve this application, and therefore will be supporting it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trent.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I tend to agree with what Councillor Lepolovin said. Had this been a first planning application on the road of its nature, I would have been very concerned about it. But when you look at the map of the site and the surrounding area, it seems that it's become or it's becoming the norm in this street, and it would be very difficult to say you can't have it if someone up the road has had it. But I think otherwise it would be excessive. Even as backland development, it would be excessive. The objector talked about 2 trees, one wholly within Maxwell Road, and the other one could possibly be within the Hankinson Road site. And I did get the photographs eventually, but it looks to me as if the 2 trees were very close together, and one of them would probably have to be moved anyway. They usually advise if we've got 2 trees practically, growing into one another, that one of them needs to go to protect the other. I would quite like a comment on that, and whether the tree indicated, see if I can get my A's and B's right again. No, I can't find the appropriate page, but the tree indicated, does the root area actually have any impact on the site, or should I say, does the site have any impact on the root area? Because it does look close, and although the tree on the map is obviously far enough away, we're talking about something above that tree on the map that isn't marked on the map. One assumes sort of it's close to behind the new bungalow, and perhaps a position of it can be clarified, but also whether or not one of those would have a root area that could be endangered by the development.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think we have a tree officer with us, but Mr. Gould, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Slightly confused, if I'm honest. So I'm not sure whether Councillor Trent refers to this tree here, which is the green circle, which is the lime tree that I've referred to, which is protected. Members will note the sort of the root protection zone, the bigger, wider sort of grey circle. So none of the proposed building obviously encroaches beyond that root protection zone. There's a small area of the garden, but not the building.
I think he was referring to the 2 trees
that were photographed.
I don't have the benefit of seeing that because I'm looking at the PowerPoint presentation.
Right. Okay.
I can only conclude that, and as I said earlier, Chairman, that those those comments came from somebody who lives backs onto 85 Hankinson Road. So if I move back to this image here, which I said earlier, so this is the rear of 83. So next door we've got 85, where we've previously seen there's an infill bungalow that's nearing completion. So I would suggest that the trees that are being talked about would be over in this area here. And if we cross-reference back to the ARB plan, then they would be outside of the site.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. I mean, there is a tree dead centre of the photo in front of us now.
That one?
Yes, yeah.
Again, it's not shown on the ARB plan, Chairman, and again, I would just stress that our tree officers have looked at this, and if there's any shortcomings, and they're normally very hot on this sort of information, if they're identifying missing trees, they would have notified the applicant.
And there's one to the right of it in the photograph that looks a fairly significant tree.
This one, Councillor Trent, or the taller one?
The one you're pointing out.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That might be something that's within the site, but that's not objected to the removal of that. That's not regarded. That's not a protected tree. It wouldn't be regarded as a high amenity value tree or species tree by the tree officer.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Trent?
Well, it looks quite significant to me. It's a pity we haven't got a tree officer available today, because you know, especially as one of the objections referred to trees.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add my 5 pennyworth to the tree issue, if there's no TPO on any of the trees within the curtilage of the site, then the developer can just go and cut them down today. He may have cut them down already, and that would be completely within what they're allowed to do. I would, just touching on that again, there was a mention of a green corridor. I don't think that there's a formal green corridor going through there. I think what the letter from the neighbour from Hankinson Road, or was it the other road? But I think they were suggesting there was this sort of green corridor along there. But I think they're referring to just the trees, the general trees that are along the side and in other people's back gardens. Could I just get clarification that there isn't actually a formal green sort of protected area along the bottom of the site from Simon Gould? I don't think there is, but just to be 100% sure.
Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, that's correct. There's no formal designation of a sort of a wildlife corridor or a triple SI or anything like that along there. It's just that we have a scenario where there are a number of trees that have obviously matured over time along boundaries. But you're exactly right in terms of anything that's within the owner's, the applicant's ownership, which isn't protected, they could remove.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Gould. I'd just like to refer to paragraph 10 on the Local Highways Authority, who have given no objection to the application. But they do say 1 or 2 interesting points. Now, I'm fairly familiar with Hankinson Road, and I know what a dreadful street it is to try and park anywhere on there. But they do go into saying that both the proposed and donor dwellings have a shortfall of 0.5 spaces. However, in this instance, given the existing highway conditions and the existing house has 2 spaces, the shortfall can be safely accommodated on street. Well, 1 is I don't accept that, and 2, the question is, it says a shortfall of 0.5 spaces for both the proposed and donor dwellings. Now that makes it, presumably, if it applies to each of those dwellings, there's a shortage of one space. I just want a clarification on that. I'm also aware that if there is an issue about half a space allocation, the SPD requires you to round the number up to 1. So in theory, if both the donor and the development were a half a space short, in theory, according to the SPD, that would be 2 spaces because they'd both be rounded up. So, you know, so what we got is the worst case here being half a space short, and sorry, the best case is half a space short, and on the extreme of that is 2 spaces short. But either way, any under provision of parking, I do not believe can be accommodated on Hankinson Road. And I'd just like your comments on that, please.
Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just obviously looking at paragraph 10 of the report, Councillor Bartlett has obviously just sort of quoted from there. The bottom line here is that yes, there is a marginal shortfall, but the on-street parking situation, contrary to what Councillor Bartlett will probably hold, it has been deemed sufficient capacity. Now, when we receive an application like this, we would ordinarily want the applicant to demonstrate that there is capacity on the network within a reasonable walking distance of an application site. So that will have been looked at, and you know, whilst there is a shortfall, a small shortfall of on-site provision, there is considered to be adequate on-street. In fact, when I visited the site myself, I parked outside the site with no trouble.
Okay, thank you. Now, my understanding is, according to the SPD, that if there's an under provision on the site and there's considered to be adequate on-street parking, this has to be validated by a proper assessment, a formal assessment, and it has to be submitted to demonstrate, provide evidence that is so. Has a report parking assessment been submitted for this application?
There would have been a supporting statement that would have addressed the highway implications of the scheme. That's correct, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
I'm talking about a formal parking assessment, a proper report that assesses it, you know, where you measure from 100 metres from the application site, you measure the amount of available free curb space, and you deduct then the lowered curb spaces, you know, and you take it at 3 different times of the day. You know what I'm talking about?
Thank you, Chairman. I can't confirm with the information I have in front of me whether a standalone highway consultant report has been submitted, but as part of the local planning authority's assessment, essentially the highway officer would have visited the site and undertook a very similar exercise to satisfy ourselves that where a report had been submitted, that it is accurate, or if there hasn't been one, that you know, we are happy as our own assessment as the local highway stroke planning authority that there is sufficient on-street capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Of course, we come down to a subject without a proper report and a proper assessment, down to a subjective assessment, and that's why the SPD actually requires a formal report, which I'm disappointed to hear that we don't seem to be able to confirm whether we have it or not, which does leave it a little bit up in the air. I don't want to do my heels on this too much, but I am aware just how difficult the parking. I think you were extremely lucky to actually find a parking slot on Hankinson Road. Actually, be interesting to know what time of day that was.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. It's just going back to the tree issue. On the photos sent through from the neighbour, from what I could make out, unfortunately I couldn't do a site visit on this one, but from what I could tell, it looked like a laurel or a Portuguese laurel to the left, and then it looked like a sycamore tree to the right. So on the photo that we're looking at now, the taller tree, I think, is probably a sycamore, that one, yeah. And then the shrub to the right is it's a shrub. So, you know, it can't be protected. It isn't an ancient hedgerow. So, you know, any landowner could take that down unless it was part of a planning condition. But I'm just a bit unsure as to what curtilage of land the sycamore sits in. Is it the application site or is it the neighbours? Thank you.
Mr. Gould.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I feel like we've sort of gone, we've sort of tried to address this point already. The information that we have before us today would suggest that it is outside of the application site. And as I've said a couple of times already, we would have had this independently, well, looked at by our tree officer, who would have visited the site. Where we have scenarios that trees are not accurately plotted or shown that could have an impact on the development, then obviously we would go back to an applicant and ask them to update their plans. That is not the case here. And again, just picking up on Councillor's point about the laurel hedging, it goes back to the point that Councillor Bartlett made about if it's within the ownership of the applicant there and it's not protected, then you know they are entitled to remove that. And if it's a species, sorry, a tree that's outside of an application site, then they wouldn't be entitled to take that down. And in fact, I'm not a tree expert by any means, but I believe that actually laurel hedging is regarded by tree officers to be actually quite invasive and almost, probably sort of welcomed in some instances for its removal.
Councillor Barron, are you satisfied?
I think Officer Gould's getting confused with rhododendron actually, because laurel is actually a fairly good hedging medium. Although, yeah, you know, it can't be protected under a TPO order. It is a great shame that the tree officer isn't here. I appreciate that the lime has an individual TPO on, but just because one tree has a TPO on doesn't mean to say that another tree nearby isn't worthy of a TPO. And you know, when you're a tree officer, which I have been a tree officer, and you go out and you put orders on, you don't necessarily look all the way down the road for other trees that are potentially worthy of a TPO, because you're normally called out to look at one particular property. So yeah, I could just do with some more information on that. I do appreciate that you're getting bored with the conversation, but I'm not obviously entirely convinced. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stribley, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I didn't intend to speak again, but Councillor Bartlett raised the interesting issue on the parking. Now, I have always said every new development should produce the maximum parking required for that development. But time and time again, I've been told, and planning officers have insisted, oh, well, it's all right. If you're a bit short, you can park on the road. Well, you can't park half a car anywhere, except in the scrapyard, maybe. But here, the precedent is already set. I accept that Hankinson Road isn't that busy at the moment, but then nowhere is in lockdown. But in normal times, I do know Hankinson Road, and I know how busy it is and how difficult parking in that area is. I just wish that argument were sufficient to substantiate and maintain a refusal on this site, but I fear it isn't. It's almost identical to what's next door and several other properties along the road. So therefore I shall reluctantly vote for it, but I don't like it at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will say that there is no precedent in planning, and this is a totally separate application to the one next door. So if there are matters relating to this application that you don't agree with, it doesn't matter what happened next door. We're looking at this application, not the one next door. Mr. Gould, for my...
Sorry, Chairman, could I respond to that? I agree that
Please.
technically is no precedent, but basically if you have a whole street of similar developments, you refuse one in the middle, we all know what the inspector is going to say.
We can guess what he might say, but that's purely hypothetical. Mr. Gould, can you just satisfy my curiosity? How close are the two bungalows, the existing one and the planned one?
So can you see that drawing now, Chairman? Hello, Chairman.
Yes, I can see it. Yep.
Yeah. I don't have a scale, the ability to scale in this particular instance, but I'm just having a quick cross-check with the report to see if there's any information in there.
I'm talking about between the two bungalows, 81A and the proposed.
Oh, right. Sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you were talking about the two-storey properties fronting. Let me just. There we are. There. Again, I don't have the ability to scale looking at this PowerPoint presentation, but we know that if I draw your attention to the width of one of the parking spaces, they will be 2.6 meters wide. If we were to try and put that parking space in there, I would suggest that it's under 2.6 meters.
Thank you.
I would say it's in the region of 2 meters, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Kelsey, who hasn't spoken on this matter yet.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate this. It seems to me that we have various different opinions on this application at this moment in time. Chairman, I'm wondering whether it is worth going for a deferral on this so that we can have a future hearing per a tree officer with us and also a updated parking assessment as requested by Councillor Bartlett. I think that might enable members to make up their mind. I myself am totally confused by this one at the moment. I can't decide whether I'm actually for or against it, and it may be that having those officers present at a future meeting may be able to help us make our minds up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that suggestion, Councillor Kelsey.
If that's a proposal, I'm willing to second it.
Thank you, Councillor. If you can hold on one moment, I'm just going to consult with the officers. Hang on a second. Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelsey, was that a motion you were putting forward?
Yes, Chairman, I'm prepared to put that one forward. Thank you.
And I'm seconding it if it is a motion. Marion Le Pen.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Gould, did you want to come in before we take a vote on that motion to defer this application?
No, Chairman.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to defer this application. In the usual way, I shall read out each councillor's name and ask them if they are for the motion to defer, against, or wish to abstain. Councillor McCormack.
4.
Councillor Bartlett.
4. And I
Councillor
did RTS before the vote, actually, Chair, which you've missed me out.
Sorry, Councillor Bartlett, are you happy to carry on?
Well, I think you've already started the vote, so I guess we're going to have to carry through with it now.
Yeah, Councillor Barham.
4.
Bear with me, my screen has just jumped. Councillor Davies.
4.
Councillor Dunlop.
4.
Councillor Hall.
4.
Councillor Hilliard.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Kelsey.
4.
Councillor Poidevin.
4.
Councillor Lawton.
Against.
Councillor O'Neill.
Against.
Councillor Stribley.
Against.
Councillor Trent.
4.
Thank you. Mr. Tyler.
Thanks, Chairman. Sorry, I don't think I recorded your vote there. Did you cast a vote?
Myself, Councillor Bull, 4.
Thank you there, Chairman. So tallying up the votes, for the motion, the total number of votes are 11. Against the motion, the total number of votes are 4, and there were no abstentions. So that motion is carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Mrs. Barrable, saw your RTS after I started the vote. Do you wish to come in here, or have we missed?
Thank you, Chairman, but I think it's been missed. I just wanted to clarify whether we were having a deferment or adjournment, just look at those bits. But obviously you've put forward, the motion that's been put forward is to defer, so that's the one that will now be the case.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Barrable. I suggest we have a short 10-minute comfort break at this point, and if councillors could return by 15:20, can you make sure you turn your mics off? Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Planning Committee on today, the 11th of June 2020. Just like to inform you that Councillor Dunlop has now left the meeting, and we shall move on to application 8D 134 High Street, Poole.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can perhaps just seek confirmation that the members are seeing that title sheet.
I can see it. If any members can't see it, please RTS in the panel. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, 134 High Street, the proposal is conversion of the upper floors of this building, or part of the upper floors, to 6 flats. Let me just take you through the location, which will be familiar, I'm sure, to many members. Pedestrian precinct of High Street, Poole. I think the thing that anchors it, perhaps, to enable people to visualise it, is that that is the level crossing in the top right-hand corner of the image. And to put that into further context, the site stands at the corner of North Street and the High Street, pedestrian precinct progressing from north of there and south of there, north beyond the crossing to the Fulton Square shopping development. A building that many members might be familiar with. It's a prominent locally listed building, previously occupied by Burger King, which made it a bit of a landmark because of its signage. It's currently partly occupied by a coffee shop on the ground floor. The Church of Scientology occupies another part of the ground floor and part of the first floor, primarily within the 2-storey flat-roofed element to the rear of the building. Let me leave it on there. The proposals include some very minor external changes to the building, including adding windows within the roof space. You can see that there are no windows. The dome windows are not there on the current building. Adding windows and some alterations within the circulation space and accommodation within the building, but relatively minor external changes to the building. Taking you into the internal proposals, the ground floor creates an access from the rear, but also from the front, so dual access to the shared stairs that go to the upper floors. On the ground floor, bin and cycle stores to meet the requirements of the flats would be provided. So access up to the first floor, within which the Scientology Church, or Church of Scientology, occupies this space. On the first floor, 3 flats. 2 of those are within the dominant, let me go back to the dominant corner element of the building. 3 flats on the first floor, moving up to the second floor, 2 flats and a single flat up within effectively the roof space with those new windows on the top floor. All of the flats, 3 1-bed, 2 2-bed, and the top floor one being a 3-bed, all of them meet the national space requirements, meet or exceed. Again, just to give you an aspect onto the High Street, and I just draw your attention there to the principal change being the addition of the 2 domed windows within the roof slope. There's also some additional changes to the windows in terms of the detail and the fenestration of those windows. Those changes, in fact, having permission already going back to a 2017 consent, having already been considered as acceptable and therefore wholly appropriate and in keeping with the character of the building. But the building, as you will appreciate, fills the whole of the site, and therefore, in association with the proposed 6 flats, there is no car parking provision. This represents a shortfall of 5 car parking spaces. That is to say, a gross shortfall, because clearly the flats are occupying floor space that would otherwise be occupied in other ways. And this has given rise to a Highway Authority objection. I'd like to take you through the balance that the judgment that we're asking you today to make on that. The proposals, I'd suggest, nevertheless, are in a highly sustainable location in the High Street. They're within walking distance of a main line, so the site here, walking distance of the main line railway station, walking distance of the central bus station. So a highly sustainable location on the High Street. Adjacent to all the town centre amenities, and they would, as new dwellings on the High Street, contribute to the vitality of the High Street. They would secure the future of a locally listed building that's currently unoccupied and therefore underused, a prominent locally listed building in a central conservation area. And I would suggest that given all of these benefits, these considerations should, in combination, have more weight attached to them than the car parking shortfall in this particular instance. I can, on the back of previous discussions at this meeting, hear the word precedent hanging in the air, and I know that we've heard Mrs. Barrable explain to us that there is no such thing as precedent in planning, and that is essentially the nature of it. But that perhaps oversimplifies the situation, and some of the discussion in the previous item touched on that. There's no expectation that committee or the local planning authority, let's talk in terms of the local planning authority rather than the committee, there's no expectation the local planning authority will slavishly follow previous decisions. You have to consider, the planning authority has to consider every application on its merits. However, decisions already taken are material considerations when you're addressing subsequent applications. And there's therefore an expectation that there will be a degree of consistency from a local planning authority in decisions, that if presented with the identical circumstances, the same context and facts, the local planning authority will reach the same decision. However, approving this application would not tie your hands on the issue of zero car parking in such a sustainable location and given the set of circumstances of this application. But if all of those considerations were to arise again, there's a strong expectation that the local planning authority would come to the same conclusion. So it is a question of asking you to weigh in the balance the relatively small gross shortfall of 5 parking spaces against the benefits that I've set out in terms of the proposed development. I'd also, as you go beyond that, remind you that paragraph 109 of the National Planning Policy Framework is very explicit that development should only be refused on highway grounds, and if you permit me, I'll quote it, if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe, and the word there is severe. Therefore, the recommendation is that, notwithstanding the objection from the Highway Authority, that the benefits weighed in the balance of this development would outweigh that objection, and that planning permission should be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I shall now refer to Mr. Tyler, who will confirm any written statements or requests to speak from ward councillors.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that we have received no written statements in objection or support for this application, and similarly, there have been no requests to speak from ward councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. In that case, I shall invite committee members, if they wish to speak, to type RTS in the panel in the usual way. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is an interesting, quite unique proposal, I feel. But to me, this is an excellent use of the upper floors of this largely vacant building. It is sympathetic to its surroundings, with limited loss of privacy. Buildings already do look into each other. It is, after all, a high street. Whilst there is no parking available on the site, the location does offer several opportunities with regards to sustainability. It is also near to both a rail and bus station. It offers footfall, which is badly needed in support of the surrounding retail units. And indeed, I wish I saw more of this constructive use of buildings in the town centre, as opposed to numerous empty shops, offices, and in some cases apartments, often due to a lack of refurbishment or presentation. And I actually feel in these unique circumstances, I have no hesitation in supporting the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stribley. Councillor Stribley.
Sorry, Chairman, I had pressed the wrong button and hadn't unmuted myself. I do apologise. I'll start again. I do agree with most of what my colleague has said. I have no problem with the design or use of the flats, etc., etc. But I do have one big but, and that is it is so remarkably rare that our highway officers ever recommend a refusal. I am simply stunned on this one. And they also know all the reasons behind it, and they have their proper guidelines, they're professional officers. So I do think we have to take that into control. If we look at the site plan, if you like, the floor plan of the ground floor of the building, the rear of it, that top left-hand picture, it is perfectly possible that access to the rear of the site could be given for a number of vehicles, and that the first floor and upwards could be well developed for flats. So there is a possibility that with some structural engineering, of course, some car parking spaces could be provided. It would be tight, but it's not impossible. We've had such a bad history of building with huge shortfalls in car parking spaces. Poole recently passed an application for the old Sherry and Haycock site just over the old bridge on Poole Quay. A brand new development on what is a cleared or will be a cleared brownfield site with 60 car parking.
Councillor, can we stick to this application?
I will stick to this application. I strongly believe that yes, we must use all old buildings to their to the best possible way. I think the designs and alterations proposed in here are very good, but I think we have to pay strong attention to the Highway Authority. That's why we have them, and while I like it in all other respects, I'm afraid I could not possibly support it with absolutely zero parking on the site. Even if you walk and catch the train and catch the bus, most people these days have a car and they will want to keep it somewhere and use it sometime. I wouldn't mind if the parking were off-site, but they don't have any at all, and that is really too difficult to cope with. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. I like this one. I appreciate that. Well, it's not a property that I would buy or rent owning a car myself, but it's so close to the train station, it would suit a commuter ideally. It really would. I like the way that they've taken into account the features of the listed building. I think it's a really good use of that empty space, and it's going to bring more footfall to the high street, and I think it's really good for the town. I like it, and I'll be supporting this one definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trent.
Yes, Chair. I do agree that it's very unusual for transportation to object to a planning application. I do think, however, that we are in a situation where we've got to make better use of the town centre to get more residential units in to keep it alive. And I would have thought that there was an answer here, because it's not a million miles from the Chapel Road car park. And I'm wondering whether transportation need to look at this and possibly offer residents permits, to people who live in an area, defined area in the town centre, to give them permits to use local car parks, much like you get on the street permits. And certainly, as I say, if I lived there and the car was kept in Chapel Road car park, if I wasn't a regular user of it, although there would be some concerns about security of it, but you get that problem outside a house, let alone away from the site. But maybe we ought to refer this to transportation and say, because we do need to look at and review the local plan, and there are so many issues that need to be talked about, such as revitalising town centres and keeping it going post the COVID recession, that it does need to be looked at seriously. But as a standalone application, apart from obviously sharing the concerns about there being zero parking, I'm generally supportive of it, but I do think we need to get some agreement so that those who do live there, who have got a vehicle, have got something that they can do with it constructive.
If that's a proposal, I would second, Chairman.
Chairman, could I perhaps come in at that point? Sorry, I can't put in the request.
Yes, Mr. Evans, please do come in.
My understanding is that any residents of the flats would be entitled to apply for permits. I think there is a cost attached to that, but they would be eligible to apply for permits to use nearby car parks. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Yeah, can I just say that we actually need to still refer it to transportation, because when looking at future car park provision, they need to.
We're looking at this application, Councillor, not.
Yeah, but I know. I think this is still relevant, that they need to consider that you've got half a dozen properties that need parking, and that when they're actually looking at rationalising car parking, they need to take that into account and where it is.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, now, having looked at this and listened to the debate so far, I actually feel better about this application having no parking spaces than I would if it had 2 or 3 and didn't meet the number of flats at least. And the reason for that is these flats, obviously nobody lives there yet, and they will be put out to tender or sold however. And in looking at buying these places, people who had 2 or 3 cars won't be interested. It will be of interest to people without cars or with 1 car that they feel they can park nearby. I'd feel worse about this if it had 2 or 3 parking spaces that people would then try and fight over, and would lead to a worse situation, in my opinion. And I think the planning office has done a very good job in weighing this up, and I agree with him. And I think that the vast benefits of this proposal outweigh the negative impacts of there being no parking, because I just think it simply won't be of interest to anyone who would have a problem parking their car. So I really do think that this is an excellent scheme, an excellent use of an empty building, and I would wholeheartedly support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trent, I just want to come back to you. Did you actually propose a motion there?
Well, I didn't actually propose a motion.
No. Okay. Thank you. I didn't think so. I'll come back to you shortly. I've got a few people who wish to talk. Councillor Le Poverdine.
Thank you. I totally agree that this is a good reuse of the existing building. It makes absolutely minimal changes to the appearance of it. It's a well-known pool landmark, very, very prominent, fairly unique, I would say. If you can be fairly unique, I don't think you can, because it is very much a statement building, and it would be good to bring more vibrancy and more people into the town centre, creating footfall and security to have people living there all the time. On the parking issue, I'm not clear why transportation think it would create highway issues, because there are double yellow lines all round. Are they really thinking people are going to try parking on the double yellow lines? People won't be driving round and round looking for parking spaces, because they'll know there aren't any, except in the official car parks. So I'm not quite sure what they're referring to. The one slightly downside is that the nearest car park we now know is scheduled to be built on, to be developed in the fairly near future. So it takes us back to the main Chapel Lane car park, which is very near, but a little walk, but certainly not impossible. And I think this is a very good use of the site.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor.
If the motion's been put and it hasn't been seconded, I'm happy to second it.
The motion hasn't been put, but you can put it, or I can go back.
I'll put it then. I propose the motion that we accept this application.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor O'Neill.
Councillor O'Neill seconds that. Okay. I've got a couple of other councillors who wish to speak. So, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I think our planning officer articulated a case for use of this building extremely well. And I think that was also put forward by Councillor Johnson, who I agree with absolutely. Of course, there are only traffic issues if the people who occupy those flats actually own cars. And I agree with Councillor Johnson that probably they'd be very attractive to people that don't own cars because of the sustainable location for them. This is an excellent use of the site and has overwhelming public benefit of putting them into use. It's such a highly sustainable location, so I will certainly vote to grant this application.
Thank you, Councillor. I shall go to Councillor Kelsey as he hasn't spoken on this matter.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. I totally agree with Councillor Johnson on this. I think it's an ideal use of a building, bringing it back into a use for everybody. I don't see the parking being a problem. There are so many people now that live, work in town centres that do not have cars. And if they do have cars and they cause problems, then we do have an enforcement part of the council that will deal with those problems. So I will fully support this application, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stribley, did you want to come back in? You're the last person on my list.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me now? Because everything else has gone black.
I can hear you, yes. Yeah.
I am concerned that the planning officer is not certain whether there is resident parking available or permits available for people living in the town centre. And as I'm not a town centre ward councillor, I'm not certain of that position either. And if they are entitled to obtain a planning permit and park elsewhere within the town centre, should they own a car, then I would be 100% behind it, because I think in all other aspects it's an excellent application. But it's so extraordinary for the Highway Authority to put in an objection to a planning issue that I would find it very difficult to vote against them.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm afraid I can't answer your question on whether they would be able to apply for a permit or not.
But the planning officer ought to know, Chairman, or should have found out.
Chairman, if I can come in, my understanding, unfortunately, because I've got a few connectivity issues, I can't bring up the comments from the transportation officer. My understanding is that they can apply for a place or apply for a season ticket within the car parks, and as I say, I think there is a cost attached to that. It's not an entitlement to have on-street parking, as I understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Stribley?
Well, almost, Chairman. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Lawton.
Thank you, Chairman. I tend to agree with Councillor Kelsey and Councillor Johnson. The one way in which we can regenerate and encourage regeneration of town centres is for people to live in the town centres. And people who purchase flats in this building are aware that there are no parking facilities. I'm happy and understand from the planning officer that if you do have a car, you can apply for a permit at a local car park. So on the understanding that people are aware of and what they're buying into, I don't see any problem with granting this particular application, and I'm in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Trent, and then I will go to the vote. Councillor Trent, can you also, after you've spoken, please clarify the motion that you're putting? No, sorry, was it you that put it forward? No, it was Councillor Providin. I'll take that back. Councillor Trent.
Yes, Chair. I hope this is working, because I've had the thing flown up that said the request to speak wasn't going to be action because of a problem with the server.
I can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, right. I'm quite happy to support the planning application, but it has been done in the past, and I think it should be done now, that this could be the first of many similar applications in the town centre. In fact, it's something we want to encourage. So I think it would be very useful for transportation and an appropriate committee if it exists, or it'll have to be cabinet if it doesn't exist, to consider the permit thing. Is a season, are we talking about a season ticket in the car parks or a resident parking permit? I think they would be quite different. I'm actually saying that to deal with the few people who own cars, and bear in mind that if you work outside the town centre, or if you work on one of the industrial estates and you work unusual hours, you have to have your own private transport. And I do think that this needs to be dealt with as a policy issue quickly. It doesn't affect this planning application directly, because I think this is perfectly acceptable on its own. But
I think in this case, Councillor Trent, we're going off into areas that aren't relevant to this application. So if I can,
but I do think
draw to a close there.
I do think as a planning committee we need to flag up that here is an issue that's cropped up, and that it needs to be looked at by someone and a policy devised to deal with issues like this in the future.
I'm sure we can do that outside of this meeting. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, Councillor Le Poivre, could I ask you to clarify what your motion is, please? Thank you.
My motion is that we should accept the officer recommendation that we accept this planning application, that we approve of this planning application. A bit wordy, that wasn't the right wording, but that we accept the application, approve the application.
Thank you, Councillor. So you have put forward the motion, and Councillor O'Neill has seconded the motion. I should just ask Mr. Evans if he wants to come in.
Chairman, no, nothing to add. If Councillor Trent would take some comfort outside of the context of the meeting, my understanding is the car parking SPG review is imminent, and that will address all of the issues that I believe he's concerned about. We'll look to harmonise our approach to car parking across the three former boroughs, three former highway authorities. And I think Councillor Trent will find that some of the questions that he's been asking will be answered by that, and perhaps he can keep an eye out for that consultation about to start. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay, I shall go to the vote. The motion is to approve the application put forward by Councillor Poivre and seconded by Councillor O'Neill. I shall call out your names in the usual way and ask you to respond for, against or abstain. Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Le Poivre.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Stribley.
For.
Councillor Trent.
For.
And myself, Councillor Bull, for. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The total number of votes for the motion is 14, so that is unanimous. The motion has carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. And moving on to the final item on the agenda for this meeting. Application for 15 Creedy Road. I should give a few moments for Mr. Hodges to set up the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Hang on,
If anybody can't see it, please let me know. Thank you, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, so yes, this is a householder application at 50 Creedy Drive in Christchurch for a single-storey rear extension and new decking. Site is a modern townhouse development close to the town centre, so Tuxton Bridge on left-hand side and the town centre in the top right. So the application is one of a number of townhouses in a modern development. Members may recall we were looking at an application in nearby Malmesbury Close at the previous meeting. So the property is this 3-storey townhouse here. Just on this aerial photo, just draw your attention to a number of the properties having carried out rear extensions over time since the development was initially built. So red line site area here, 3-storey townhouse with an attached garage. The property is one of a terrace of 3, and the proposed extension will go onto the rear at the back here. So this is existing appearance of the property. This is the existing side elevations. So the proposed extension will be on this right hand side here, and you can see the proposed deck as well there. This is the side profile of the extension. As you can see, both sides here, no windows proposed on the side elevation, extends 2 metres to the rear. This will be the proposed floor plan existing on the left-hand side, proposed on the right-hand side with the rear decking. You can see flat roof extension with bifold doors. And that's the roof plan of the extension up on the first floor. Just to confirm a point made in the report, that on the top we have the application for members today, and below is a scheme that the council has confirmed is permitted development, is a lawful development, and so this elevation on the bottom has a lawful development certificate, so the applicant has a fallback position to carry out this development below, and the only difference between the extension before you today is a 10-centimetre difference in height. Just also to clarify another point in the report, that provided the extension was dropped 10 centimetres, the applicant could do a larger extension under permitted development at 3 metres, and under the prior approval process could propose an extension up to 6 metres from the rear. Just some views of the house. So the extension will sit in, looking at this middle photo, just in this area here, and come back 2 metres along these boundaries here. You can see the relationship with the adjoining property, and on this next photo, just top right, you can see the properties perpendicular to here, and you can obviously see some of the properties which have added rear extension already. And so, Chairman, on the basis of the applicant has a fallback position to do largely identical development as permitted development, we recommend the application for approval to you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. I just refer to Mr. Tyler, who confirm if any written statements or requests to speak have been received.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have received one written statement in objection to the application from a Mr. A. Hudson, and I will just read that out for the committee now. Sorry, it's just loading.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have Mr. Hudson's address, please.
Yes, the address provided by Mr. Hudson is 17 Creedy Drive. And if I may just point out at the bottom of the statement, he does also list the names of several other local residents, which I'll read out. Mr. Hudson and Jennifer Howlett, 17 Creedy Drive. Avril and Jeremy Coulton, 18 Wick Point Mews. Peter Holway, 16 Wick Point Mews. So this is the statement. We would like to address the Planning Committee on behalf of the following objectors to the application. We live at 17 Creedy Drive, 18 Wick Point Mews and 16 Wick Point Mews. We will not repeat the objections put forward in March, which are unchanged in relation to the plan submitted. However, since making these objections, we met with the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, on the 5th of June 2020. They have submitted application number 82300 CLP, which is lawful. In our meeting, the applicants showed us 2 revised plans indicating that they do not intend to build out as far as previously indicated, stating approximately 1.5 metres only, thus alleviating loss of light objections, and the left side of the extension as viewed from the house will not be nearer to the current fence line with 17 Creedy Drive than the internal wall line of 15 Creedy Drive, and it will be positioned such that it will overcome the 45 degrees rule objection. The applicants have advised that they plan a mezzanine step from the new extension floor level to the ground level, i.e. no raised decking, thus reducing loss of privacy concerns. They will also ensure that rainwater drainage from the adjacent garage roofs will not be affected by any pile driving, footings or construction to the existing drainage onto their property. We would also note that, although we have seen reference to a number of extension works in the area, all properties and their location in relation to other properties are unique, and therefore previous permissions should not be considered as setting precedents. We understand that this application would permit the applicants to build slightly higher than allowed by 820/300 CLP. Therefore, as a constructive proposal, we would support the requested height subject to either of the 2 revised plans mentioned above being implemented. Thank you for your consideration. End of statement. There was no request from anyone speaking in support or from a ward councillor for that one, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tyler. I take it that all members have seen the addendum to this item with the correct plans that was emailed to them. I shall now invite any committee members who wish to speak to do so in the usual way by typing RTS in the panel, and Councillor Hilliard has done so.
I think Peter Hall is trying to do an RTS. As ward councillor, does he want to go first?
Yes, please.
Certainly, Councillor Hall. Councillor Hall?
Hello?
We can hear you now.
Oh, thank you. Would I like to ask a question to Mr. Hodges, if I may? This was on the website, and it showed that recently the plans was changed. So what was advertised are not the plans that were now being submitted. Can you tell me when that was changed, please?
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding is the plans haven't changed since they were initially submitted. So this was the application scheme that was put forward at the start of the process, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodges. What I would like to do then, Mr. Chairman, because the neighbours have got together, I mean, it is a second home, number 15, Creedy Drive, but 17 is a permanent residence, and they are still a little concerned about the height. But as there's a gentleman agreement already in place, I'm quite happy, Mr. Chairman, that we propose, providing that the new plans are in place as agreed. So I'm quite happy to support this and propose it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. I shall take your proposal, but I've got a number of people who wish to speak first. So, Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. Similarly, so I was astounded that this came here because looking at section 14, where it refers to the difference of 10 centimetres in height, is the difference between this application and the lawful permitted developments. And yeah, as Councillor Hall has said, it is great that neighbours have actually spoken to each other and talked about their proposals, and then finally at the 11th hour they're all happy. So I'm happy to second the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor. I shall allow those who have indicated that they wish to speak first before we go to the vote. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chairman. If I understood what officers said correct, that the actual extension could have gone further, but the the roof height was 10 centimetres higher, which is 4 inches, so it's not a lot. I would have thought that the fact that it is well short of what would be permitted development, I think the extra 4 inches in height is quite a good price to pay for having less depth, so to speak. And I wonder whether because they've exceeded permitted development in one bit and they've done some sort of development, that they don't have the ability to put a 3-metre extension on the back of this extension under permitted development, that they've basically used up their permitted development rights. So I wonder if that can be confirmed. Otherwise, I'm quite happy with the application. I think it's actually a slight improvement on what would have happened if they had just taken permitted development.
I'm not entirely sure if that's relevant, councillor, but Mr. Hodges, do you want to come in on that?
Just to clarify an issue about a fallback position, Chairman. Under the permitted development order, if you've carried out an extension and then you add on to that extension, it's a cumulative amount that you consider. So the regulations talk about, does the extension connect to an existing addition to the property over the original dwelling? So if the council, if the committee grants the planning application today for going out 2 metres, the applicant can't come back and propose another 3 metres on top of that as permitted development. They need planning permission, just to clarify that point. I do just think, while I do have, rather than coming back in, Chairman, I just want to clarify a point about the move. I have read the letter from the neighbours which refers to a different development. Just to clarity for the committee, we are not considering that plan. We are considering the application that's in front of us today, which is going out 2 metres. So we do need to be clear that we're making a decision on the currently submitted plan that extends back 2 metres. We haven't been contacted by the agent or the applicant to indicate that they want to do a lesser development. If the committee did approve the application today, then the applicant could do a smaller extension and get that agreed as a non-material amendment, and we wouldn't need to come back to the committee with that, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm somewhat bemused about the change of events, because I did have some concerns. And I think one of the things that I did have concern about was the height and the proposed mass. And the mass is exasperated because the adjacent property, number 17, is actually set back from number 15 at the rear of the property, and they all have small terraced or patio gardens. Having said that, if there is a gentleman's agreement and that's recognised, let's hope that the neighbours' gentlemanly agreement doesn't become ungentlemanly. And I think we should move to a vote rather than debate it further. There seems to be an agreement. As long as amendments can be made that are recognised that underpin that agreement, then I'm happy to proceed to an approval on that basis without conditioning. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. As Mr. Hodges pointed out, we're voting on the plan in front of us, not on the gentleman's agreement, which is between them, and hopefully they will honour that. So if everyone's happy, I shall go to the vote in the usual way. I shall read out your names, ask you to vote for, against or abstain. The motion on the table is to grant this application. Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Leopardovin.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Stribley.
For.
Councillor Trent.
For.
And myself, Councillor Bull. For. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Total number of votes for the motion is 14, and that is unanimous, so the motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. So that application is granted. And that is the last agenda item. I'd like to say thank you to the members, to the officers, to the public who sent in their statements, to the ward councillors who attended, and to everyone watching. Thank you. This meeting is now closed. Thank you.